All right. Glad somebody remembered that. And without further, just one more thing. Let me see if I can point something else out here. Okay, so the weekly themes, all these presentations are based on the Aquarian Almanac, which is this wonderful document that is prepared by students that has been thought through astrologically, has been thought through in relation to times of the year, celebrations of the year. It very much is a celebration of the second object of the Theosophical movement. And first of all, one of the things that works really good is that all 52 themes of the year have already been mapped out, which is really fantastic for the people trying to put this together. And also, it's a way of looking at theosophy from hundreds of different ways, different aspects and celebrations of different instantiations and versions of the spiritual striving of humanity. So we're looking at celebrations of many different systems and traditions and looking at theosophical ideas from many different points of view. And as we do this, and as we take this journey together, kind of creating this instant sangha as we go along each week, there's a certain continuity of consciousness that hopefully is grounding and helpful for people, a certain amount of nourishment at a certain time during the week. And that is a wonderful foundation, we hope. So, and then I just wanted to point out that on this website, San Diego Theosophist here is the ULT at San Diego. Just one last thing I wanted to point out is that media, it's under media. So far, we've got about 40 videos that are posted, and we're working on more of them. And you'll recognize some of these titles as I scroll down through them. And they're all just excellent. I just can't believe, but I can believe how much effort and sincerity is put into each one of these presentations. So anyway, the website is called theosophysd.org. So now, without any further ado, I will introduce to you Dr. Barbara Hebert, and she will be presenting to us on the service of humanity. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you. And thank you all for having me here. I am truly, truly honored and privileged to be with you all this afternoon, this evening, as the case may be. So I'm going to just start off with a question. Why are we here? I mean, right now, you and me, here today, together in this gathering. Well, we're different than many others in the world. Not better, just different. We have made a commitment to step onto the spiritual path and to study the ageless wisdom. We've made a commitment to look beyond the materialism that is inherent in our world and to delve into the teachings shared with us by H.P. Blavatsky, her teachers, and others. Theosophy is available in today's world in order to help humanity. In fact, this statement is made very clearly by HPB, her teachers, and others. I'm going to share my screen with you. We can look to the letter of what is referred to as the Mahachohan letter that was written in late 1881 or early 1882 by the Mahatma K.H. regarding a conversation held with the Mahachohan regarding the teachings shared by the Theosophical Society. And from that letter we read, "For our doctrines to practically react on the so-called moral code, or the ideas of truthfulness, purity, self-denial, charity, etc., we have to preach and popularize a knowledge of theosophy. It is not the individual and determined purpose of attaining for oneself nirvana, the culmination of all knowledge and absolute wisdom, which is, after all, only an exalted and glorious selfishness, but the self-sacrificing pursuit of the best means to lead on the right path our neighbor, to cause as many of our fellow creatures as we possibly can to benefit by it, which constitutes the true theosophist. In a different letter, the Mahatma K.H. writes, "The first object of the society is philanthropy. The true theosophist is a philanthropist who, not for himself, but for the world, he lives." In the Key to Theosophy, HPB tells us, every true theosophist is morally bound to sacrifice the personal to the impersonal, his own present good to the future benefit of other people. She defined true occultism as altruism, and she further tells us a true theosophist must put in practice the loftiest moral ideal, must strive to realize his unity with the whole of humanity and work ceaselessly for others. In his 2011 Blavatsky lecture, entitled The Bodhisattva Path, Bhupendra Vora tells us, the Bodhisattvas or Mahatmas are driven by an impelling desire to help alleviate the suffering in the world and to lead all sentient life to liberation. They are not merely beings on their way to the status of fully enlightened Buddhas or adepts, but are beings who, through their great compassion for all sentient life, renounce the ultimate bliss for themselves. He goes on to say, it is this spirit of compassion and love, implicit in the principle of universal brotherhood, which should be the guiding light of a theosophist. To understand the oneness of all existence is to develop an intense state of spiritual love, divine wisdom, and compassion, founded upon an impelling will to help all sentient life. We know this already, don't we? I'm preaching to the choir, so to speak. At some point in our individual journeys, we realized that we were committed to following in the path of the Mahatmas, the teachers of Blavatsky. We made a conscious decision to become true occultists, philanthropic, altruistic theosophists, whose goal is to work for those great ones in the service of humanity. We chose to follow the Bodhisattva path. This path, according to HPB, is one that, although the Mahatmas have attained the right to enter in nirvana, they renounce it in order to stay in touch with humanity. The hitherto very esoteric doctrine of the Nirmanakayas was lately brought forward as a proof and explained in the treatise called The Voice of the Silence. These Nirmanakayas are the bodhisattvas, or late adepts, who, having reached nirvana and liberation from rebirth, renounce it voluntarily in order to remain invisibly amidst the world to help poor, ignorant humanity within the lines permitted by karma. We have chosen to focus, to the best of our ability, whatever that is, on alleviating the suffering of humanity. One who follows the Bodhisattva path is an individual whose thoughts, words, and actions focus on serving the well-being of all others, not merely in a physical sense, but in the highest sense of facilitating enlightenment. The voice of the silence asks us, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shall thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? We have taken this verse to heart and responded that we will serve until all are liberated from rebirth. According to Jack Kornfield, the Dalai Lama regularly recites Bodhisattva vows based on the words of Shantideva, a 6th century sage. That version is this: may I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitudes of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. This is the Bodhisattva path. How do we, as human beings who often struggle just to get through the day in our own lives, how do we become all of these things for others? Well, there are two aspects that are worth exploring today that may shed light on how we, in physical manifestation, can follow the Bodhisattva path and serve humanity. One aspect is the physical service that we provide to others. Many theosophists are already engaged in this type of work, whether as their career or as a volunteer. Many of us are innately drawn to social service work in some form or other. Others spend their time as volunteers working at food banks and homeless shelters. Some work to provide support for those impacted by crises, trauma, and catastrophes. Others work for social justice and equality in the world. And the list goes on and on. We each serve in our own way. It is important, however, that we remain aware that our personalities can easily get caught up in our efforts to serve. Self-observation of our motives, especially deeply hidden ones, is essential. I'll share my screen with you again. Well, let's see. Mabel Collins, in her essay on karma at the end of the book, Light on the Path, reminds us of this, saying, desire to sow no seed for your own harvesting. desire only to sow that seed, the fruit of which shall feed the world. You are a part of the world. In giving it food, you feed yourself. Yet, in even this thought, there lurks a great danger, which starts forward and faces the disciple who has for long thought himself working for good, while in his inmost soul he had perceived only evil. That is, he has thought himself to be intending great benefit to the world, while all the time he has unconsciously embraced the thought of karma, and the great benefit he works for is for himself. Also, as we see the consequences of man's inhumanity to man, the suffering inflicted on others, we may get caught up in blaming or becoming angry with the one or ones who are causing that suffering, something that I think is very relevant in our world today. William Q. Judge, in his article, How to Treat Others, tells us the subject relates to our conduct toward, let me say that again. The subject relates to our conduct toward and treatment of our fellows, including in that term all people with whom we have any dealings. No particular mode of treatment is given by theosophy. It simply lays down the law that governs us in all our acts and declares the consequences of those acts. It is for us to follow the line of action which shall result first in harmony now and forever, and second, in the reduction of the general sum of hate and opposition in thought or act, which now darkens the world. Mr. Judge goes on to say, he goes on to write, the Master K.H., once writing to Mr. Sennett in the occult world and speaking for his whole order and not for himself only, distinctly wrote that the man who goes to denounce a criminal or an offender works not with nature and harmony, but against both, and that such acts tend to destruction instead of construction. Whether the act be large or small, whether it be the denunciation of a criminal or only your own insistence on rules or laws or rights, does not alter the matter or take it out of the rule laid down by that adept. For the only difference between the acts mentioned is a difference of degree alone. The act is the same in kind as the violent denunciation of a criminal. Following Judge's words, I'm sorry, I stopped. That's the part that I quoted there for you all to read. But Mr. Judge continues, and he says, either this adept was right or wrong. If wrong, why do we follow the philosophy laid down by him and his messenger and concurred in by all sages and teachers of the past? If right, why this swimming in an adverse current, as he said himself? Why this attempt to show that we can set aside karma and act as we please without consequences, following us to the end of time? I know not, Mr. Judge says. I prefer to follow the adept, and especially so when I see that what he says is in line with facts in nature and is a certain conclusion from the system of philosophy I have found in theosophy. Following Mr. Judge's words about karma, there's something else we must consider as we strive to serve humanity, in this physical manifestation. This additional concept requires discernment and introspection on our part. It is the difference between fixing, helping, and serving others. Diana Dunningham-Shapotan cites the article In the Service of Life by Rachel Remen, published in the spring 1996 issue of Noetic Sciences Review. According to Shapotan, Remen distinguishes between fixing, helping, and serving. Fixing is a form of judgment. To fix a person is to see them as broken rather than inherently whole and perfect. Helping is based on inequality. To help is to use one's own strength in place of the lesser strength of those helped, and so diminishes their self-esteem and incurs a debt. Serving is mutual. Service rests on the basic premise that the nature of life is sacred. When we help, we see life as weak. When we fix, we see life as broken. When we serve, we see life as whole. In order to determine if we are fixing, helping, or serving, we must look to ourselves and our perceptions of the situation. This statement leads us to the second aspect of following the Bodhisattva path. Well, in physical I have to admit to you that I do have you can tell that I have my talk printed out. When I don't follow the talk printed out, I lapse into my Southern accent, which is sometimes hard for people to understand. So this is how I keep myself in my Wheaton accent, in that Midwest, so people can understand me. This statement leads us to the second aspect of following the Bodhisattva path while in physical existence, and possibly the most important component of our journey. In order to serve others, we must work on ourselves. The statement seems paradoxical. To help others, we work on ourselves. Yet we know from our theosophical studies that the unity which binds us all provides clarification for this paradoxical statement. As one individual changes, it causes a change in the whole. Therefore, as each one of us works on ourselves, we are, in essence, working on and for the whole. In the words of HPB, it is a fundamental doctrine of theosophy that the separateness which we feel between ourselves and the world of living beings around us is an illusion, not a reality. In very deed and truth, all men, and I think if she were here today, she would say all women, are one. Not in a feeling of sentimental gush and hysterical enthusiasm, but in sober earnest. As all Eastern philosophy teaches, there is but one self in all the infinite universe. And what we men call self is but the illusionary reflection of the one self in the heaving waters of earth. True occultism is the destruction of the false idea of self, and therefore pure spiritual perfection and knowledge are nothing else but the complete identification of our finite selves with the great all. Oh, yeah. there. She continues, it follows, therefore, that no spiritual progress at all is possible except by and through the bulk of humanity. It is only when the whole of humanity has attained happiness that the individual can hope to become permanently happy. For the individual is an inseparable part of the whole. Our role then is to grow spiritually, to expand our consciousness so that we can change the consciousness of the world. While our paths may look different, they inherently have the same goal: to grow spiritually and to expand our consciousness in order to reach the summit of human existence so that we may serve in ever deepening ways. This is a funny looking slide, I know. When I was a young girl, my grandmother had a painting in her bedroom, and I have not been able to determine which one of my cousins inherited that painting. So this was the best I could do. The painting was of a mountain with pilgrims following the long and circuitous path up the mountain, heading toward the summit. The path, as with most mountain paths, was filled with switchbacks, hence this picture, thus making the route even longer. However, here and there in her painting, there were pilgrims who had abandoned the slower path and were making their way upward, blazing their own trails. It's these in yellow, just making that difficult climb, as opposed to those who are slowly going. We are the pilgrims, blazing our own trails up the sides of the mountain. Therefore, we are, to continue the metaphor, facing more obstacles in a short period of time than our brothers and sisters who are following the well-worn path. Again, we are not better than those on the well-worn path up the mountain. However, we are different. We are striving to understand ourselves, to gain control over the personality, and to reach those highest aspects of ourselves. B.P. Wadia, in his article, Growth Through Service, tells us that our work is to give that which the masters gave to the society for the purpose of helping the world. What was that? The spiritual knowledge, which gives a basis for the true life of the spirit, which gives us material for building the foundation of the true type of altruism. Thus, each individual can serve in terms of his or her own spiritual life. The most effective way to share spiritual knowledge, it seems, is to experience it. And each of us will experience it in our own way. To do this, we must begin by looking at our own inner barriers to spiritual growth. Diana Dunningham Shapaton calls it, quote, perhaps the bravest and most radical step we can take. She says that we must be willing to face our own doubts, needs, and resistances, the inner barriers to the expression of our caring instincts. We need to own up to feelings of guilt, anxiety, discomfort, disappointment, and vulnerability. We also have to look for the deeper fears behind these spontaneous reactions. Fear of loss of control, of being overwhelmed, of having our heart broken, and ultimately of extinction. I will add here that for many of us, the fear of losing our belief system is right up there with the rest of them. This is the core of theosophical service and the surest way to open the heart to its potential of limitless giving. Service is a journey of awakening. She continues by saying, we know that we have an infinite power within to give, and that every human being is perfectible. We can stride out boldly and joyfully on the path of service, looking fearlessly at the deeper, darker levels of our psyche and reaching gently to touch that special, quiet center within. If the conviction of our oneness is strong and the vision of it remains clear, it will be with us at all times so that only compassion fills our heart. Some may argue this point of working on the personality, saying that we need to abandon it, ignore the physical, and focus only on our Atmic Buddhic nature. On the other hand, we have been given this personality and placed in physical manifestation for a reason. We have emotions for a reason. Learning through the experiences of the personality provides us with the opportunity of moving forward on our trek up the mountainside and allows us to reach toward the highest aspects of ourselves in a totally different manner. For example, we know that separation is an illusion and that we are all one at our essence. However, for many, this may simply be a cognitive understanding. It is through experiencing that essential unity that our consciousness expands. Once we begin to see glimpses, even reflections of glimpses of truth, we begin to realize that we are all one. And this great truth is pivotal in our journey and in our spiritual self-transformation. It is this expansion that impacts the consciousness of humanity, even if it occurs in infinitely small and very slow steps. It is this expansion that is the most important aspect of our service to humanity. As our consciousness expands, we change. Our perceptions are altered. We are transformed, regenerated. In Sri Ram, former international president of the Theosophical Society, Adyar, writes for us. Let me share this with you. The Mahatmas who aid evolution, although they are interested in all changes that make for human progress, are especially concerned with the spiritual regeneration of mankind, which is of fundamental importance. Because when that takes place, all else follows. What the Mahatmas want is this regeneration beginning with ourselves. Our role in this work, beginning in the next second or the next minute or whenever, is to transform or regenerate ourselves. Because in doing so, we are transforming the world around us. We are helping to expand the consciousness of all life and thereby helping to alleviate the suffering of humanity. If we imagine all of life as a glass of clean water, we add a drop of blue dye to it, which may be our small step forward in perhaps in controlling an irritable thought when we're cut off in traffic. We watch the blue swirl into the water and then slowly dissipate. However, if we continue to add drops of blue dye to the water, it will eventually begin to take on a blue hue. If we believe that all living beings are interconnected, that we are all one in our essence, then we are like that glass of water. Every time one of us takes even the smallest step towards spiritual self-transformation, regeneration, a small change occurs within the whole. A slow process, so we don't necessarily see the changes. But we know that with enough change, enough drops of blue dye, the whole will change. So, the most important component of our service to humanity is to work on ourselves. In this way, we change the world. We help to alleviate the suffering in the world through the expansion of our own consciousness, which impacts all consciousness. As we grow in understanding of the ultimate unity and interconnectedness of all life, so does this understanding grow slowly in the mental consciousness of all beings. We are theosophical servers. We're not better than others, but we have chosen a path that is committed to service. Service that extends long past this particular physical incarnation. We've chosen to help others in physical ways, food banks, homeless shelters, and so on. But much more importantly, we have chosen to take the shortcut up the side of the mountain. By doing so, we recognize that every time we overcome an obstacle, as we purify ourselves and our motives, the true self can shine even more brilliantly in our lives, and this helps humanity. HPB tells us each individual must learn for himself through trial and suffering to discriminate what is beneficial to humanity. And in proportion as he develops spiritually, that is, conquers all selfishness, his mind will open to receive the guidance of the divine monad within him, his higher self, for which there is neither past nor future, but only an eternal now. As our consciousness expands, so does the consciousness of humanity. As we grow spiritually, so does all of humanity. Our focus is on spiritual growth, not for personal gain, but in order to help humanity. It is this growth that is the mark of one who has chosen the Bodhisattva path. This is our service to humanity. As we continue on this difficult trek up the mountainside, may we be inspired by the words of Mabel Collins in Light on the Path. She writes, "Let the darkness within help you to understand the helplessness of those who have seen no light, whose souls are in profound gloom. Blame them not. Shrink not from them, but try to lift a little of the heavy karma of the world. Give your aid to the few strong hands that hold back the powers of darkness from obtaining complete victory. Then do you enter into a partnership of joy, which brings indeed terrible toil and profound sadness, but also a great and ever increasing delight. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So lovely and so awakening and so regenerating. So thank you very much for this beautiful thoughtfulness of the two ways, if you will, of service to humanity and the implications. I guess, why don't we just, if anybody has any comments or questions, just put your hand up with that electronic thing, and Barbara will probably see that. I'm sure she's used to all that.
Yes. All
And
right.
We'll take your answers in either one of your two accents. So.
Okay. Well, you will definitely get the Southern accent, and I apologize for the cough. Monica, please.
First of all, let me just say thank you so very much. This has been needed by this student for so long. I'm embarrassed to even think how long. But I want to say to you that part of the reason for that is that in this student's particular journey, I had a time period where I was totally engulfed in self-improvement, class after class, spend a weekend and become totally enlightened, in so many different aspects of being in so many different ways. And I could never say I got nothing from it. But the idea that Theosophy did not have for us a proper focus on oneself for the purpose of others was not clear enough to me, I think, as a young person. But you just healed it. You just cleared it up with this presentation and in hearing these thoughts married to service. And for that, I am really grateful. Aside from the fact there's just an amazing presentation, so full of love and so full of clarity. But I have one question, and really it's just, if you would not mind reiterating the section where you spoke about calling out the criminal. That did not get, forgive me, it's my own maybe tendency or something, or misunderstanding, or some combination of both, that, are we not supposed to shake a finger at them? Or I'm not clear about that. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
So I can only share with you my perspective. And those were the words of Mr. Judge. And I will find this back in my paperwork and give you that specific article that you could look up and read yourself. My interpretation of that is that because we're all one in essence, blaming other people for being in the darkness, so to speak, for having actions that hurt others. And I will say, so if there, sorry, y'all, I'll get these words in the right order in a second. So if someone is inflicting suffering on another, they're working from a place of darkness. a place where they have not seen the light, or they've not chosen to see the light, whatever it is. But because we're all one at our essence, I am also that person. I am also that person. So to look at that person and say, you are a bad person for doing that, does not help that person grow in love and light, because then we're sending thoughts to them of whatever, shame, unacceptance. Thank you. That's exactly it, Jonathan. Yes. Jonathan's put the article in the chat.
Yes.
And so if we can look at that person with love, or at least in light, even if we can't love them because of their actions, if we can look at them and surround them with light, then we are working in harmony and with a constructive frame of mind, rather than destructive and pulling apart. That's my interpretation, Monica. And as we know, when you get, again, 5 theosophists in a room, you'll come out with 7 or 8, different perspectives. But as a seeker, that's where I've come to at this point in time. 10 years, who knows? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ms. Saltzman, I am so honored to meet you. So you're muted, though.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes,
You're
ma'am.
here.
Yes, thank you for a wonderful presentation. My name is Judy, and I really was very interested in the part of your presentation where you're quoting Light on the Path channeled through Mabel Collins and William Q. Judge. And it seems that we can also think in terms of, if we act for the self and think of ourself as the part of the whole, then it's what aspects of the self are we acting for the good of the whole. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita says to suspend the results of your actions, at least in the Judge rendering that I've read. There are many different translations of the Gita, and that's very hard to do. But I have an example. I remember years ago when I was teaching at a university, Cal Poly here in California, the dean came out and said to the faculty, "Don't you all want to become the distinguished teacher?" And I thought that would just be an incredibly poor motive to be teaching for, because there are ways to make yourself popular. And that's how you get that award. I knew this, and I wasn't particularly enthused about the company of some of the people who have gotten the award. So I never got it. Of course, I would have been pleased to have, but you've got to teach, I think, for the motive that others may learn. And that's not always going to make them like you. And I think that's what we have to learn, is not everyone is going to like us. And it depends on the concept of our self as a part of the whole, is how we act. It's not our personal ego, personality that's a part of the whole. It's our higher nature, our Atman Buddhi Manas.
Yes.
So do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. Of course. Yes, absolutely. We serve, we teach, we do what we do for the whole of humanity, or for the student, not for self. What a waste of time and energy that would be. Because this self is going away. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Jim?
Yes, thank you very much. It was lovely, to say the least, presentation, weaving together this wonderful fabric that you did. I'm very interested in your response to Monica's question. But I do have a different perspective, in the sense that I think what you said, which I completely sympathize with, I think is incomplete. And here's why I think it's incomplete. recall in the New Testament, when the adulteress is brought before the priest, bring the woman caught in adultery and bring her before Jesus. And the penalty, they were testing Jesus actually, and the penalty is when you are an adulteress, you are stoned. And so they bring the adulteress before Jesus. And they say she's been caught in adultery. Now, what are you going to do about it? And we know what is said is Jesus said nothing. He began scribbling on the floor. He began marking something in the dust, and didn't say a word until finally he said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Now, there was dead silence. And finally they left. But now here comes the other part why I say this is incomplete. What does Jesus do? He finally looks at the woman and he said, "They condemn you, but I do not condemn you. Go and sin no more." He didn't say that your actions acceptable are to be ignored. He said, "Go and sin no more." On a parallel point, Gandhi was once asked about someone who was engaged in thievery in a village, and everybody knew the person. And they said to Gandhi, "I suppose we shouldn't probably do anything." And Gandhi said, "No, that is not my perspective at all. Whenever you perceive an injustice, you have to have some response to it. You can't simply say, oh, you don't judge the person, oh, because they're harming people. You're part of a community. So yes, you must respond. The question is, how do you respond? Violently, non-violently, bravely, cowardly. To not act is to engage in an act of commission by omission of karma. So it is certainly appropriate to fight that inner battle of, I'm going to confront this person or I'm going to respond to this, but I'm not going to judge them. That's really difficult. That's where the shoe pinches. But you can't just, and from my perspective and what I understand about Gandhi and what Jesus was saying, is that you still must engage evil, quote unquote, in the world. It's not relative in the sense that anything anybody does is okay, otherwise there's no karma.
Yeah.
No, it's the opposite. You're very aware of every consequence of what we do, potentially. So that's why I say it's incomplete, because we do have to respond to those who act in darkness or in evil, just as we would appreciate someone correcting us if we're doing something wrong and it's causing harm.
I really appreciate your comments very much. I agree with you wholeheartedly, that my response did not take that into, I didn't respond with that degree of depth. So thank you for that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. We cannot just ignore it. We have to do something, but it's in the intention and in how we do it. So yeah, absolutely.
I just had one thing here too, Barbara. Nandini Iyer had a wonderful way of putting this that I found really, really helpful. She said, it's one thing to appraise an action. It's another thing to judge the person, because judging precludes the possibility of change and growth. But we do appraise actions because those actions matter. And it's important for us to distinguish between that which is wholesome and healthy and that which is not. So that's why actions have to be appraised, and that's the way reforms are generated. So I always found that point, that distinction she makes as a philosopheress, very, very helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially, with children, because I've worked with children a great deal. And one of the things that always in working with children or people who are going to be working with children or parents is to clarify the difference between the child and the behavior. Always.
Yeah.
Behavior is unacceptable, but the child is always loved. and cherished. Yeah, always. Thank you so much.
Yeah, wonderful example.
Thank you. Anthony.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I've a question about service. Could you please enlighten this student about service? Some of us have destinies or karmas to be social workers in capital blazing letters. Some of us have a more simple life and obligations where we're helping elderly people who are ill, and that is just a one-on-one situation. What's the difference between the blazing capital social reformer and the little simple person that's helping his friend or parent or loved one in a time of crisis?
So once again, I can only share with you my perspective. If the intention and the motive are the same, there is no difference. There are people who are going to be on the great stage of life. But if their intention is pure, if their motive is pure and for the benefit of humanity and not egoistic and self-involved, then it is no more important than the person who is helping an elderly parent, because it's all the same. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I have a question. Could I ask you, Barbara?
Of course.
You've seen a lot of people come into the Theosophical movement, and some come for a while and then they leave, or some people that you would not expect to be around a long time end up staying forever or whatever. Have you ever noticed like a process of people who at first they come because it's also very interesting, and then later I'll be out in a little bit, so and later they kind of get into more of the deeper study and so forth. But have you ever seen people catch fire with service, where they start making the connection?
Yes, actually, I have. And in fact, I think so. Once again, my perspective. And I should have started off this part of the discussion with, I'm not good at answering questions because I don't really have any answers. I only seek, just like everybody else. But I have lots of opinions.
Yeah.
Like everybody else. I think that so I think several things about this. I spend a great deal of time thinking about, why do people come toward Theosophy? What hooks them in? Why do they stay? Why do they leave? And I think the answer is so varied and multifaceted, because people are so varied and multifaceted. I think, but in relation to service, so I'll go there. I think that many young people today are coming into the organizations because they see the opportunity for service. And because I think that younger generations, not trying to put down those of us who are a little bit older, but younger generations, I think, have they have a different perspective than we do. Mm-hmm. I think they're more community oriented. They're more than many of us, not necessarily here in this meeting, but out in the world. They're more focused on doing what is best for humanity, for the planet, for others. And when they realize that the Theosophical tenets, teachings, structure provide that information and opportunity, then they're more likely, I think, to stay and become involved. I do get a lot of pushback about programming. And I do think that, for each of us, maybe I'll just own this for myself. My guess is that through my many, many incarnations, many, that at some point in time, I had no idea that there was such a thing as the ageless wisdom. But at some point, I came and bounced into it and thought, oh, this is weird, and bounced away. And then maybe in another incarnation, I came and bounced and thought, oh, this sounds a little familiar. Maybe I'll check this out a little more. And then bounced away. I mean, I don't think we ended up here today because this is our first time in touch with it. We wouldn't be the kind of students that we are or care like we do. I don't think, if this was our first touch. And so offering people the opportunity to say, nah, this isn't my thing. Okay, I wish you well on your journey. Because you know what? And from my belief system, from what I've read, they're coming back because the ageless wisdom is truth with a capital T. Anyway, I'm not sure if that really answers Jonathan, and
I think
kind of went on a tangent, but
wonderful. Thank you very much.
thank you. Thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions regarding, this is our opportunity there we go, Robert.
Okay, and then I think Laura also had a question. So Robert and then
Okay,
Laura.
I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
That's okay. Go ahead, Robert.
In any kind of skill, if you're learning to play an instrument or perfecting a sport, there are degrees, and there's degrees of perfection that you'll make. But then when you think about the ratio between selfishness and altruism, it's hard to think of degrees there. So I just wondered if you had any comment about that. It's like, well, I'm only so selfish, or I'm so altruistic. Seems like an odd equation.
Yeah. My thought about that, Robert, well, I've never really thought about it, but I think it's a really interesting question. And I'm not sure that I think we can go from 0 to 100. So I think we've got to go in degrees. At least that's what I think at this moment. So I think, I know what it was. So at the Summer National Convention, I was trying to remember where this concept came from, because it's definitely not mine. Jean spoke, and it was amazing. We also had another speaker. Well, all the speakers were amazing, but at our Summer National Convention, Kurt Leland spoke to us, and he talked about ethics, and he talked about ethics as this sort of evolutionary component. And it started off with focusing only on self, and then focusing on self and family, and maybe some close friends, and then extending to maybe the community, and continuing that process until it is all. The other piece of that I think of, and is and this is not a spiritual or theosophical perspective. It is actually a counseling theory in terms of moral evolution. That's not the right word, but that there are degrees of moral development, and so that's pretty consistent in sort of non-theosophical, non-spiritual literature. And we can look at Peck, M. Scott Peck, in his book, something about a drum. I'm so sorry. My brain, I couldn't tell you what I did this morning, much less names of books and people. But again, it's all about this gradual development. So that, I don't know. That's just a thought for now. Again,
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
5 years, I may have a whole different perspective. Laura.
Thinking of HPB and the key to theosophy, where she draws a wide net of who is a theosophist. And it seems that that net includes people that don't know about theosophy, but who live the theosophy itself. And we have many examples, one being Jane Goodall. She studied theosophy for a little while, then she left, but she maintained that idea of service. And so I think we can all see that that service of humanity shows that while we may not know the word theosophy at this point in time, we know the wisdom of theosophy within our heart.
And I think that's one of the great gifts that HPB gave us. And not just HPB, but HPB and the other founders, HPB and her teachers, the gift of the ageless wisdom that has been shared over the last almost 150 years and has crept into places where we would never have expected it to go. And has, I think, made people stop and really consider or be mindful about service, about humanity, about the unity of all life. And what again, I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't care if somebody knows about theosophy or not, but I do care if they are working for the good, the benefit of all. That, I think, is ultimately the most important. The ageless wisdom will never go away. The organizations will eventually die off because that's what they do. I mean, we can look at history and know that. Once again, I'm probably stepping into territory I shouldn't, but you know, I'm pretty authentic and pretty much say what I think. You know, organizations come and go, people come and go. It's transitory. It's illusory. The ageless wisdom is not.
Well, you said that earlier that we don't come into theosophy for the first time.
Yeah.
And obviously, the last time we came into theosophy, it wasn't the form that it is now.
That's right.
It might have been at the feet of Plato or Ammonius Saccas,
Yes.
or in Alexandria or in India. We don't know in what form it was.
Exactly. I love that idea. I love that thought.
I really liked your idea about how people, well, you kind of cited yourself, but just say people kind of come into the theosophical orbit and they stay for as long as they do, and then they bounce off.
Mm-hmm.
And or they do whatever the opposite of bouncing is they kind of circle back around and they get closer to it, and each time, and that's part of that recognition. And then also what you said about how people see a connection between theosophy and service. They either see that the idea of service is multiplied by the structure and the system and so forth that theosophy is, or that whole theosophical system is inspiring to service, but they see how it goes back and forth. And I guess we're all kind of at different places in different parts of our lives with that whole dialogue within ourselves, it seems like. So
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful.
Eugene.
Yes, more a comment. First, I wanted to thank you, Jonathan, for having the courage to ask Barbara to come here. She's a busy bee, all over the place doing so many things.
I can't believe
And
she's.
so again, thanks for asking her. And Barbara, I just wanted to say it was a pleasure to hear you. It was great to see you again. And thanks for sharing some of your brightness and your presence. I mean, it's just well received. So, much appreciated.
You are very kind. I love being with my brothers and sisters. That's so important to me. So I very, very foolishly, I think, many, many years ago, said to myself, well, I didn't say it to myself. I said it to those great ones. I will never say no to a theosophical request unless it is impossible for me to do. And I've only said one no, and throughout these times, and that was moving my children to Illinois when they were young and settled. So I didn't do that, but I would never say no. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you all. It's a tremendous honor and privilege. It really is. So, and I'm grateful.
We're grateful. And usually our time ends at about on the 45-minute mark, different times of the country, right? Thank you all very, very much for coming. Thank you, Barbara, very, very much for coming. And we love you in both of your accents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you all so much. And good night and sweet dreams to you all.
Good night.
Good to see you, Barbara. Thank you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.